Hello there, and welcome to this month's webinar. I don't know if you can tell, but I am not Marianne Ferris-Young. My name is Waylon Mickey. I am the content person here at TripSpark. Marianne is, I'm assuming, sick. She has said she is sick, and I'm going to take her word at it. I am going to try my best to answer all the questions that may come in. But if you do have any deeper questions about what's happening and the information here, then feel free to email her when her email is in the bio section or on the page that you're looking at, and she can answer them in depth. Let me welcome our special guest today, Dana Schuler-Drummond. I don't know if you've read Dana's bio, but in her description you'll see that she is a communications expert and owns and operates her own nonprofit organization management company, Sharpshooter Communications.
Thank you. This is, I will say this is the first time that I've done a webinar like this, and it's, although I have taught grant-seeking sessions and trainings for years, this is the very first time I've ever not been able to see my audience or get their feedback. So I really hope that people will either put their questions into the Q&A applet or email me with the questions. Again, since Marianne is out, she probably, I would say that she is more of the expert on specific transit funding opportunities from from any particular funder. And so I would really direct those kinds of questions to her because that is really her content expertise. I am really more of a generalist. I have written several grants for transit to the Department of Transportation in the United States. I worked with some other transit agencies on some of their projects. And so in addition to that, though, I have worked with nonprofit organizations and corporations, in fact, on all kinds of communications and writing. Really, grant seeking is writing. It's writing to an audience. There are a lot of, so if you're comfortable being a writer or you've got people in your organization who are good writers, then you've got there's a step ahead. You've got an advantage there. There are some strategies, though. There are some techniques. There are some pitfalls that you're going to want to avoid. And the things that I'm going to talk about today are very common pitfalls. These are things that I see when new clients come to me and want to find out why their applications, why their grant proposals seem to be failing. These are things that I see an awful lot. So I'm going to try to help you avoid those when you're looking at grant seeking. So let's go ahead and get started. Not taking advantage of the FOA. And one of the pitfalls that I discuss is trying to avoid using jargon and acronyms. And here I've thrown in an acronym right at the beginning and some jargon. That's, if you don't know what an FOA is, I am hoping that that'll be an illustration to you of how confusing that can be for someone when they're not familiar with what you're talking about. An FOA is a funding opportunity announcement. Sometimes they're also called NOFAs, N-O-F-As. Sometimes they're called RFPs. There are lots of different acronyms or terms that are used. In essence, what this is it's the call for proposals. It is the funding organization, the funding institution or agency saying, we would like to fund something related to this area, let's say transit, of course. And here is what we're looking for, and here's how you need to apply for it. So I'm going to refer to that document as the FOA. You may want to call it the NOFA or the RFP or whatever is appropriate for you. I'm going to call it the FOA. So really, I'd say the first problem that people have is not taking advantage of the FOA. Now, since I'm in the United States, most of the grants for transit are I do through the U.S. government, through the Department of Transportation or other areas. So I get my FOAs from grants.gov, and grants.gov is the U.S. government's website for all of the grants. Each agency will usually have their own website with some grants, but they're all compiled. It's a clearinghouse there at grants.gov. And so you can go in and search for different terms. You can, it's actually got a pretty good search engine in it. I go in there every week and see what's been released every single week. And it's anywhere from dozens to hundreds that get released every week. So it's worth being familiar with that. The FOA, when you download it, this should really be considered your Bible. This is your guidelines for writing this proposal. You need to follow all of the instructions. That sounds really easy, but the instructions are very seldom easy to follow. They're usually very detailed. They usually will give you some clues about what they're looking for as well. Usually on grants.gov, when you download the FOA, there's a place for you to sign up for email updates about that particular opportunity, and make sure that you always do that. Every once in a while, it doesn't happen very often, but I have had it happen where they will extend a deadline for some particular reason, and that's nice to know. Occasionally, they will even make updates or corrections to the funding opportunity. So sign up for those email updates. When you are looking at a funding opportunity because you've heard about it or you've just found it through a search, the first thing that you're going to want to do is just make sure it's a good fit before you invest the time in looking into it any deeper. The first things that I look at, I always look at it online at first, on the grants.gov. Sometimes you have to click a few times to get, where you really want to go. What you want to do, though, online is read the summary and read who the eligible applicants are. Those are usually headings that will tell you that. So you want to look for those headings. Are you an eligible applicant? What are the deadlines? If the deadline is next week and this is a $12 million grant, yeah, you probably are not going to have enough time to put that together. And yes, I have had people want to do that. Is there a letter of intent? I've got another acronym there, so write down in your notes, what is an LOI? An LOI can be one of several things. It could be a letter of intent or it could be a letter of inquiry. It just sort of depends on how they've got it set up. Usually for a federal grant, it is a letter of intent. Sometimes those letters are required. Sometimes they are not required. They're usually due, I'd say maybe 6 weeks before the final grant is due. So look and see when that deadline is. And the LOI is usually pretty easy. It's usually a one-page just saying that you do intend to apply for this. Eligible applicants, as I said before, you want to make sure that you're eligible. They will tell you. Sometimes you're not eligible because if the grant is only available to people who have gotten grants in the past, some particular grant in the past, or it may not be available to that it's only 501c3s or it's only state governments. There are different restrictions on who can apply. So look at that carefully. Next thing that I always look at, most of the time they will describe how many awards they expect to give. If they're only going to give 1 or 2 awards, I usually won't even bother with it because the odds are just so astronomical on something like that. It's better to just use your money and go buy a lottery ticket, but I didn't really say that. Then look at the amount of grant monies available. This gives you an idea of the scope that you're looking at. They might say that the acceptable budget is anywhere from $500,000 to $2 million a year. I'm just throwing that out. But let's say they say it's fine, that it's acceptable to go all the way up to $2 million a year, and you think, oh, I could do something with $2 million. But then you see that they're going to give 100 grants, and there's only $12 million total for that grant opportunity. You're probably not going to get $2 million, even if that's the upper range, because they're giving so many grants. They're going to be giving a lot of small grants. So just do the math on those things. Make sure this is a viable opportunity because you're going to be spending a lot of time on it. So once you've looked at all of those things, and if that FOA, if the opportunity still looks viable, it looks like something that fits, go ahead and print the entire FOA. Now, I I like to use sustainable practices, I really do, and I try not to print too many things if I don't have to. The FOA is something that's really worth printing. Sometimes it could be 90 pages long. You know, print it on front and back. Do whatever you've got to do. But go ahead and print it out because you are going to be using it all the time. And I write all over them. I make notes all over them. So I think it's important to print it out. You're going to want to sit down in a quiet place with a highlighter, a pencil, and a set of sticky tabs. You're going to just go ahead and read through the entire thing and just highlight and make points, make lots of notes about the things that they want. I usually set it aside for a day and sort of let it soak in, and then I pick it up again, and I do the exact same thing. Almost always I will see a paragraph or a section that I didn't see before, and that when you're reading it, there's so much information there. You're also, like I said, you're going to pick up on keywords, words that they are using over and over, and those are the same keywords you're going to want to put in your proposal. So look for those keywords. Once the proposal team is together, and I'm going to talk more about your proposal team in a little while, make sure that all of the team members have done the exact same thing with the funding opportunity announcement. The worst thing that you can do, the biggest waste of time that you can have, is to sit in a meeting with your team members and half of them haven't even really read the funding announcement because they really don't have an idea of what it is that you're trying to do. Make sure that everyone on board has read that FOA. Again, the FOA is going to tell you lots of things. The deadlines, make sure that you note the time of day when the application is due, including the what time zone they're in. A lot of times it's due at maybe at midnight Eastern time. It might be due at 5 p.m. Eastern time, might be due at noon on the applicant's time zone. There are all kinds of different restrictions, so make a note of that and make sure to note the time zone as well. Outcomes. Look for specifically what the funder is seeking. A lot of times they have gotten a mandate from Congress that they achieve certain outcomes. This is their bread and butter. This is how they are going to be judged on how well they're doing their job. So the outcomes are very important to them. Make sure that your proposal can have the same or similar outcomes to what theirs are. And make sure and include those in your proposal so it's easy for them to find it. I also always put a tab for this, for all of the pagination requirements. Those are really important, and you don't want to write the world's greatest grant proposal and have it tossed out because you used half-inch margins instead of 1-inch margins. Make sure you note all your page limits, your font size, your margins, your line spacing, because things like the line spacing, it might be single space or double space, and each document within your application might have a different requirement. So go ahead and make sure you look at all those and note them. The FOA is also going to tell you the format of the proposal. How do they want the proposal formatted, including all of the required sections. These are the sections that are usually included in this. They usually want an abstract, which is typically 1 page. A lot of times they want that single spaced, although I have had times when it had to be double spaced. The actual narrative, this is usually double spaced, but not always. You want to note the links requirement and what headings or subheadings are required by them. I can't emphasize that enough. If they outline it if they say that they want specific headings or subheadings, or they give you an outline, use those exact same outline, the exact same headings and subheadings that they use. They are giving you clues. So use those clues. Another part might be your budget and justification. Sometimes they want that to be single spaced. Sometimes they want it to be double spaced. Sometimes it's part of your overall page limit, and sometimes it has a separate limit. This is all information that's included in the FOA. Appendices. Look to see what appendices they want. Sometimes they want letters of support. Sometimes they tell you if you provide letters of support, you will be disqualified. So you need to make sure you read those very carefully. It's also going to tell you, See, that was just a perfect segue. Letters of support, MOUs, an MOU is a Memorandum of Understanding, letters of approval, and make sure that you make note of those and that you start those early. We're going to talk more about a timeline, but I'll tell you up front, getting those letters of support or the memoranda, those are the things that tend to take a while because you're getting those from outside sources a lot of times, and you want to give them more than enough time to get those done. The FOA is also going to tell you what the award selection criteria and process is. You definitely want to put a tab on where that starts because you're going to be looking at that a lot. It might be a multi-stage assessment. You want to make sure and see what the assessments are. Sometimes they go through 2 or 3 stages. I know that the Tiger grant through the U.S. Department of Transportation is 3 stages. So look and see what the different stages are. And also look at on the selection criteria. They'll give you specific points a lot of times for certain areas. Obviously, the areas that have a lot of points are the areas where you're going to want to spend the most time making sure that it's accurate. I've done grants where the budget narrative gets 0 points, and but I'll have a client who wants to spend 15 hours going over the budget narrative, and so you just that's just not a good return on investment. Those things, if they're fewer points, go ahead and pay attention to them. You want to have a good application. But if something is worth 50% of your overall score, that's where the lion's share of your time needs to go. Some agencies and some FOAs do provide a checklist for you. Usually it's kind of toward the back of the FOA. If they let you have that, gosh, just use the heck out of that thing because that is so helpful. A lot of times they will also provide, this tends to be toward the back of the FOA, they'll provide contact information. They'll tell you how to get additional information. A lot of times they'll have webinars and they'll give you information on that. Go ahead and note those. My experience now, Department of Transportation, I've had pretty good experience calling them and actually getting feedback from them. I've had other agencies that you can call them as many times as you want, you never get a call back. So call them if you need to, but don't be surprised if you don't get a call back. In terms of webinars, I always go to those. I always sign on to those. They are usually an hour to 2 hours long. They are usually incredibly painful, unlike this webinar, which is engaging and entertaining. Usually the webinars are a series of people introducing each other and reading the FOA to you. Just be aware that this is what it is. The only reason that I always listen for it is I can almost always pick up some little nugget of information that made it worth that hour or 2 of my time. So go ahead and suck it up. Just make sure you've got, I don't know, some filing to do or do your nails or something while you're listening to the webinar because it can be pretty painful otherwise. This is an example of an actual FOA, the application. This is one that I worked on for it's actually a client that provides health care. So I tried to do something completely unrelated as far as my example. But this was the first time that I went through it. I just made notes of what they're looking for. And this is page 6 and 7. This is just the very beginning of the description. So these are the kinds of notes and highlighting that I do when I'm walking through it and I'm looking through putting together an application. There on the side, you'll see I've got those tabs that I told you about. And I've got a sample, one is a sample budget, the funding restrictions, the contents. I've got all kinds of different things because I've used this over and over. Sometimes I'll even put it in a binder, and that can be helpful. In this situation, I think I didn't. I think I just had it in a file folder, but I'm keeping that by me at all times while I'm writing. So I am, as it says right here. In case you wondered, I do keep the FOA handy at all times. It's literally on my desk or in the file folder with all of the materials. I read through it and I use it daily. I try to, at least once a week throughout the grant process, I try to read through it at least once a week. I will almost always find something that I really didn't see before. And so it's valuable to reread it and reread it and reread it. Maybe just read one section of it, but I try to reread it at least once a week. All right, the next great big error that I see, and I would say this is probably the biggest mistake that I see, is underestimating the time frame, underestimating how much time it takes to put together a federal grant or even a non-federal grant. It just takes a lot of time because it's a big project. Your team, you need to probably put together a team. I have worked with organizations where it's just one other person and me working on it, and it's worked fine because that person knows enough about the organization or knows enough about the project that they can be the only one working on it. Usually it seems like it's most effective when there are maybe 3 to 5 people who are working on it. Usually somebody is a grant writing expert. That would be me. If you can have a content expert, the person who knows the program that's going to be delivered, you also need that. And then usually the finance expert, and that might be the CFO of the organization, the controller, whoever that person is who understands the budget structures and how much things cost. A lot of times you have to pull in personnel, somebody from the personnel office, because they might understand about different jobs or different positions. You know, there might be other team members that you'll need, but it'll just be based on the application. And it depends on how complex it is. I've also worked on a lot of grants where we're doing collaborative work. So we're having meetings of people from even different agencies in different cities or different states. And in that sort of situation, it's important to maybe have a weekly meeting where you're just updating, you know, going through to everyone's together and just updating everything. Then give your team enough time to write a really good application. Please don't let what I'm getting ready to say, scare you away, because it sounds awful, but give yourself about 2 hours per page. And that means all of the forms, all the narratives, all the budgets. And most federal grants are about 60 to 120 pages long. So you can do the math on that if it's going to take you 2 hours per page. That's a lot of hours. Now that's man hours, because you've got a big team together. Everybody's doing their own little thing. Like I said, if you look up a NOFA or an FOA and it's due next week and it's a $12 million budget, don't try to, well, you may try to do it. Just be aware you're going to be sleeping at the office for the next week. The important thing to do once you've got your team together is to set a timeline. One member, it seems to work better for me if one member of the team, and that usually tends to be me, establishes the timeline. Then the team needs to meet to review the timeline and then make any adjustments as needed. And it's good to have one person who's also monitoring the timeline. Your due date, set your own internal due date for at least 2 days before the official due date for the grant, and then work backwards from there. I would love to say my grants always get turned in 2 days early. That's not the case. I would say most of them get turned in either the day before or the day that they are due. Don't kick yourself if it gets submitted, you know, the day that it's due. That's not that unusual. In fact, I think most people do. But don't wait until the last minute to get it uploaded. I had a client once who dragged their feet, and we finally started uploading the grant 5 minutes before it was due, and their system crashed. And so we were not able, I think we uploaded it, it was due at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we updated it at 3:02, and we missed the deadline. So there was a lot of time and effort that were lost because they waited till the last minute. So that's pretty heart-wrenching when that happens, but it happens all the time. Put one member of your team in charge of keeping people on track with their duties, and don't get mad at them when they hound you. And then getting letters of support and MOUs, those are those memos of understanding. That's going to take longer than you think it will, so make sure that that's one of the first things that you get done, that you start contacting people for that. One other tip that I can give you is I will usually offer when you're soliciting an MOU or a letter of support from an outside agency, I will always offer to write it for them, and then they can sign it. I would say 95% of the time they agree to do that. They might tweak it a little bit, but if you offer to write it for them, it's going to help them turn it around a whole lot faster, and you'll make sure that they say what you need them to say. A typical timeline, when I first started putting this webinar together, I was going to just show you one of my timelines, and I decided not to do that because I was afraid you were going to think that you had to stick to that, because every grant opportunity is different, and so every timeline looks different. But these are just the things that you should probably include in your timeline. I've tried to sort of put them in order. Some of them might be out of order a little bit, but this tends to be the priority for me. Identifying your scope, identifying your team and team leader, verifying your SAM and grants.gov login, submitting your letter of intent, identifying partners, sources of those letters and memos, get your budget information together, do your outline of your application, your draft budget, all the supporting materials, then do your draft 1, then your draft 2, fill in all the standard forms. Those are usually some additional forms that you have to fill out, and then review your entire application package and submit your application. All right. I was starting to talk about this a little sooner, and then I realized that we were going to talk about it now. But another really huge problem that I have when I work with my clients, and like I said, I'm a generalist, so I work with organizations that do housing for homeless people, and healthcare organizations, and dental care organizations, and faith-based organizations, and transit organizations. And all of the people that I'm working with are content experts in their field and in their discipline. Like you're an expert in your own field. You cannot assume necessarily that the person reading your application has the same level of expertise as you do. They probably do, but don't assume that. So you need to really define your scope and your partners as well as possible without making any assumptions. What I finally end up telling my clients to do is to just pretend that they're talking to a third grader and describe what it is that you want to do and why do you want to do it. If you have actual access to a real live third grader, that works out great. And I will sometimes use my own kids. They're older than third grade now, but I'll sometimes ask them if they understand what it is that I'm talking about. And if they don't get it, then I haven't explained it well enough. I'm making it too complex. I'm putting too much jargon into it. The same thing, you're going to make your list of partners and describe what each of them are doing in third grader terms. You want to explain the cost in terms of major expenses of the project and keep it simple, but then explain and list each line item, then list how much of the cost comes from the grant, how much from the other sources. This is an internal document. I'm not saying this is necessarily part of your application, but just in order to get your scope figured out, these are the steps that you need to do. At the top, you're going to see KISS. This is not any kind of suggestion for inappropriate activity. This is an acronym that I like to use. It's keep it simple, stupid. When all else fails, make it as simple as possible. Make sure a third grader can understand it. You can make it more complicated later, but to start off with. Had a really funny experience with a client, and this was the first time I started working with transit. And I adore this client, and they do wonderful work, and we've been really successful in doing some grant seeking. And the very first meeting that I had with this team, they probably spent about 20 minutes. I was just listening because it was my first time, so I didn't want to interrupt too much. But they kept using lots of acronyms, lots of different terms I wasn't familiar with, and they kept talking about rolling stock. And I probably spent an hour and a half wondering what in the world rolling stock was before I finally just stopped them and asked. And it turned out that just meant buses. So when you're using terms like that, when you're writing a grant for a funder, be aware that the terms that you use every day may be a whole other language to someone else. Again, use your third grade language and then describe how long this will take. Now, I don't mean writing the grant. I mean how long the actual project is going to take. In the first year, we're going to build some capital. We're going to build a new bus terminal. In the second year, we're going to integrate the needed software and we're going to beta test it. We're going to test it. The third year, we're going to roll out. The fourth year, we're going to do an assessment. Just a general of what you're going to be doing in your project. Then you can share this with your team and just ensure that everyone is on the same page, and then you can start making it more complicated. Overthinking the language is another error that I see a lot. A lot of people are not comfortable writing, and I understand that. As a professional writer, I write all the time, and it's so much easier for me to write than it is for me to do anything else. But that's not normal for most people. For most people, they just struggle to write and to write clearly. And people get nervous, and so they go back to writing for Mrs. Morgan, and that was my senior high school English teacher. I always read things, and I can tell that somebody is trying to make their English teacher happy because they have they'll have a paragraph that has the opening sentence and the thesis sentence and you're not trying to make Mrs. Morgan happy, so that's not your audience. You really need to make your proposal something that another human being, someone like you, is going to enjoy reading. It's not going to be painful. The person who is reading your proposal is a human being, and the chances are they're having to read several different proposals. They're probably sitting down at night and reading a stack of proposals. Please don't torture them. You're asking them to give you a lot of money. So make life a little bit easier for them by making your proposal easy to read. Use headings. Use infographics. When I talk about infographics, this might be a table. It might be a chart. It might be a photograph. It might be a map. It could be all kinds of different things. I'm going to give you what I like to call one of my Jedi mind tricks. The human eye will automatically go and look at that graphic. There have just been studies. People have written all kinds of books and made careers and written dissertations on what people read on a page. If you've got a graphic on a page, that's the very first thing that the human eye is going to look at. The second thing that they're going to look at is a cut line or a caption underneath that graphic. So if you've got a graphic or a photo and you don't put a caption underneath it, then you are wasting an opportunity to share some really concise information. Every time you have a graphic, please put a caption underneath it that explains it or provides other really important information that you want to make sure that the reader gets, because they will, I promise you. They might be falling asleep in the rest of it, but they will see that. You also want to put a footer on each page. I do this with the identifying information and your geographic location. Like I said, they might be reading 20 of these in one night. So if they can glance down, if they forget who they're reading at the moment, this will be helpful. Cross-referencing in the document is fine, just don't overdo it. Cross-referencing meaning, see page 21, section blah, blah, blah for more explanation on this, something like that. I'd say that's okay to do, but don't overdo it, because then it just is too complicated. Use an active voice whenever you can. That means instead of saying, you want to say, our organization will deliver rides to 12,568 people next year, instead of, we expect that 12,965, whatever number I just used, people will experience a ride provided to them by our agency. That's really complicated language. It's longer, and it just takes too long to figure out. So use an active voice whenever you can. Then at the end, actually throughout. Don't do it at the end, because then it's going to frustrate you. But along the way, go ahead and run diagnostics to determine what grade level your document it is. I've done a little how-to on Word. If you don't know how to do this, if you use another program, just Google it and find out how to get it. The Fleisch-Kincaid reading level. It's going to tell you that. What I try to do is aim for no more than a 12th grade reading level, and that's not because the people reading it aren't capable of more than that. It's just that they might be tired. If you aim for 12th grade, it probably means you're doing a pretty good job using active voice. So higher than that, it might be getting a little too convoluted. Use of jargon. The person reviewing your proposal probably, well, I'm going to say they will. They'll have experience in your discipline and be familiar, but don't use too much jargon because it might just be something that you in your region use, and maybe they don't know what it is. When you use an acronym like MOU or FOA, spell it out the first time if you use it. In general, shorter paragraphs. Try to aim for about 10 lines per paragraph and 3 lines per sentences. So you don't want to run on a sentence and you don't want a paragraph that lasts for 4 pages. There's always going to be exceptions, of course. Okay, the biggest mistake after that I see is people who throw in the towel and they give up. Just hang in there. A lot of people do get into it and it's just too daunting. You don't want to enter the process lightly, but if you're committed, just make sure you set yourself up for success. Set aside the time in your calendar. Make sure on your team, I've had this happen so many times, but make sure in your team, if you've got a 4-week window to get this done, make sure that somebody isn't going on vacation for 10 of those days. I've had it happen, and they'll forget to tell you, oh, yeah, I'm going to be out. Oh, yes, I'm having foot surgery that's been planned for 2 years, 3 days before the grant is due. Be aware of those things when you're going in because that does happen. It happens a lot. You also have an opportunity to join discussion groups a lot of times or Twitter feeds, Google Alerts. If you don't know about Google Alerts, Google it. And go ahead and sign up for that because it'll automatically send you an email if something comes up. Go to the webinars, have a consultant help you if needed. Talk to Mary Ann and she can help you. Also, just accept that this is a stressful process that you're going to go through. Just accept it. And then getting the outcome. Of course, you submit it, and then you wait for weeks or even months to get a response. Go ahead, regardless of the outcome, and hopefully it's positive, and you do your happy grant dance, and you start making plans for how you're going to start managing that grant, which is a whole other webinar, I'm sure. But if you, regardless of the outcome, if it's turned down or if it's approved, go ahead and ask for the reviewer's comments. Sometimes they'll automatically send those to you, and sometimes you have to request those formally. So go ahead and get those every time. Go ahead and review the comments the first time. And the very first time that I review comments, I see things that are very ugly about family members of the reviewers and their DNA and their education, and I say all kinds of horrible things about them because I wonder what they were taking when they were reading my application based on their comments. Go ahead and accept that it kind of hurts your feelings, and then put it down for about a week, pick it back up, and then you'll go, oh, yeah, I guess they were kind of right about that. Maybe I could have explained that a little bit better. Or maybe they really were tired and they just sort of missed it. I had one application where 2 of the reviewers said that we did an excellent job describing the demographics of the population, which was a heading, by the way. And we even had an infographic and a table about the demographics. And then the 3rd reviewer counted off points and said didn't provide any demographic evidence. And I'm thinking they must have not read the same application. So it happens. They are human. Oh, yeah, I did actually use the word idiot. Yeah, you know, there's a chance. And then try again. If you didn't get the grant, keep watching for the next FOA. If you did the Google alerts or you go to grants.gov all the time, you'll be seeing those. And here's the other thing. Don't assume that you were not an excellent candidate for the grant the next time. I had a funder once ask if they could use a grant application that I helped a client with They called the client. They said, you guys did such a great job on your application. We would like to use your application as the example on our website of what a perfect submission would be. And we were dancing around doing our happy grant dance, and a week later they called and said that we had not gotten the grant. So, and it was because they were focusing on rural and we were urban. So there's all kinds of different reasons why you didn't get the grant. Don't assume that it was because you were worthless. Just, the rule of thirds. I want to make sure and tell you about that. There's sort of a rule of thumb. This is not official, and if you say that I say it was, I'm going to deny it. The first time that you apply, this is kind of for federal grants, or I kind of use it for any grant. The first time that you apply for a certain program or an agency, I would say you probably have about a 33% chance of getting funded. Second time, I say you have about a 66% chance of getting funded. The third time, if you're not funded after the third time, they're probably not going to ever fund you. Now, there's exceptions to that. But after the third time, I just kind of go, okay, something major has to change in order for them to look at us. But as you prepare your next application, keep your reviewers' comments next to you along with the new FOA, and keep those next to you and make sure that you don't make those mistakes. Because they're also going to tell you what the strengths were, so go ahead and use those strengths as well. There are a lot of resources that I like to use, and I wanted to just put a few of them on here. These are little tricks that seem to help me. Skype, I use Skype for a lot of meetings. In fact, I've got one tomorrow in Latin America just to talk to each other. You can do it face-to-face. You can do it just voice, but it's just a good way when you need to meet with a team. You can also do Google Docs. I use Google Docs a lot for real-time collaboration on a grant application, especially a big federal grant. We can all be on it at the same time, and we can all see what changes everybody makes. And then I use Smartsheets, which is another software product that is good for a timeline. It's good for making assignments. You can also do a Gantt chart if you needed to include that. So explore those options and see if those are something that might help you. And I'm going to look and see. Hey, I'm at about 45 minutes. I didn't think that I could actually talk that long. Wow. I'm going to see if there are any questions.
You did a great job. Even though I've been on mute, I've listened to every word. I've been on the edge of my seat wondering how it was going to end, and it ended well. After listening to that, you talked about the FOA and printing it out and keeping it with you. Now, is this a document that changes radically over time, or it can't be a constant that stays the same for years?
No, it's not usually constant. From year to year, it changes. A lot of times, though, like with the Tiger grant that I've done, I guess, 3 of those. And each year there are a lot of things that are similar. There are a lot of things that are different. So no, you're not going to ever step in the same river twice because things will change. Things are going to change. Even if it was the exact same FOA, things in your organization are going to change. So it's going to affect the way that you write them. So yeah, definitely.
It seems daunting that you need a dedicated person to be constantly researching the funding landscape, right?
I think it's helpful to have someone, if it's not, well, I'm trying to think of the right way to answer that because, yes, it is good to have a dedicated person who is monitoring that, but it's also, I think it's a best practice to make sure that every member of your team understands that it's everyone's job to look for these opportunities because sometimes now with a federal grant they're all going to be released on grants.gov, but a lot of times there might be a state or a province or a county or a city or some other sort of a grant or even a private foundation that's not publicly, that hasn't necessarily been released through grants.gov or any other kind of database. And so everyone needs to kind of be listening for these opportunities and sharing them with the team.
I've heard of people using sort of creative reasoning to look at grants again in a different way and to look at the product or the thing that they're trying to fund in a different way. for example, like looking at a greenhouse emissions reduction initiative and then suddenly seeing a product or like a piece of technology that can contribute to that. And nobody had thought to see that way before.
Absolutely, and that's why I think that it's important to get on grants.gov and be familiar with grants.gov because, I've got the transit client that I've had. We've looked at grants from, the Veterans Administration. Well, who would think that would be transit? But they've had some things that have been related.
Right, so it's not as cut and dry as it may seem, and if it was, we'd have robots doing it for us, which we don't yet.
And thank goodness for that, or I might not have a job.
No. We still need you, Dana. I do. Actually, also, you were talking about that grant example that you had. Now, if I was a grant writer professionally, that would be something that would be an excellent thing to see. I don't know if you would be able to ever produce that, like as a guideline, for what has been not necessarily one that was successful, as you said. It didn't turn out that way, but that's not the application's fault, was it?
No, and that's something that and I do kind of have some examples that I've used and other things, and if that's something someone would like to see, what I'll do is go through and redact it just to take out any information that would identify clients or the location or anything. But everything is it's all so different, and like I said, it could be a perfect application, and there just seem to be other elements at work, whether maybe you are rural and they only want to fund urban, but they didn't even say that in the FOA, so you have no way of knowing that.
Yeah.
You just have to understand a lot of times it's a numbers game. The more applications you put out there, the more likely you are. I'm sorry, let me restate that. The more quality applications you have out there, the more likely you're going to get funded. But you're always going to hear no a lot, and you've just got to get used to that.
Well, I think we're looking at that's our time. It seems like we've answered as many of the questions as we possibly could. Obviously, if there was anything else, people can feel free to email them in. And unless, Dana, you have something else to say? Do you want to wrap something up?
I just want to say thank you so much to you for all of your help today, and thank you to TripSpark for putting this on and organizing everything. It's been a pleasure to do that and to work with your entire team, and hope Marianne starts feeling better and that she's able to chime in and maybe add some things to this later on.
I know, right? I know. I miss her. I never thought I would have to, but now I do. I find myself missing Marianne. But okay. So I will say thank you, and thank you for the extensive research that you've done and the very specific information you've given. For anybody who's wanting that, it can be available for download, as the whole slide deck with all that information is there. And as well, of course, this recording will be ready, I'm going to say tomorrow, but don't quote me on it. So again, thank you, and good day.